So the agenda is we're going to just go through 2 or 3 slides of very quick overview, just give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about in this webinar, and pretty much spend most of the time on a demo where we're going to create example forms and show you how to create business rules for common dynamic behavior that most of the time we see customers implementing. And hopefully we have some time at the end for questions as well. Okay, so real quick, I know there are a couple of people on here that are not familiar necessarily with frevvo. This is literally going to take 2 minutes, if that, this quick introduction. What we do is help our customers use very simple visual tools, form designer, workflow designer, business visual rule builder, PDF generation, etc., to automate their everyday processes, things like purchase order, employee onboarding, etc. And they can do it really quickly without requiring expensive IT resources. And that's really where, instead of programming, visual tools, drag and drop, point and click software really helps do this without needing programming resources. Just a quick look, we have a number of customers, several hundred customers, including several names I'm sure that you recognize here, from very large organizations to very small organizations, all using frevvo and benefiting from the ability to automate their workflows in an affordable and rapid way. Some of the things that they're using it for, hopefully I'm guessing you guys have very similar business problems within your organization: purchase orders, expense claims, travel expense reports, travel claim, onboarding new hires, a very common example, absence reporting, permission forms, sales orders, transportation. And then another one is a common use case is integration, especially with SQL databases. And we had a webinar a couple of weeks back on this. You can find a recording of that on our website, as well as several example forms. And of course, there'll be others as well. And of course, frevvo can also integrate with other business systems as well. So why dynamic forms? At the end of the day, what we know is that in customer situations, real-world business forms and workflows are complicated. They're not just a contact form or like a wedding invitation or something like that. They're typically lengthy. They have complex validation, lots of business logic. They need to show hide sections on demand, conditional routing, performing calculations, those kinds of things that we're gonna show you examples of. Mobility, of course, it needs to work on mobile devices. They want digital signatures. It's one of the most common use cases to avoid the need to print, sign, and scan. We talked about database and business system integration. Also, of course, the ability to use your existing authentication mechanisms, things like Active Directory, SAML, Azure AD, etc. To be able to attach files, use the camera on your phone, accessibility, ADA compliance, or WCAG for international customers, and then, of course, internationalization, of course, so that it works worldwide in all kinds of languages. So the requirements for real-world business forms and workflows are complex, and the good news is frevvo provides all of this amazing capability in a very easy-to-use visual package at a reasonable cost. So that the topic of this webinar is dynamic forms, and we're going to show you how you could point and click using our visual rule builder to implement this relatively complex business logic in your forms without writing a single line of code. Okay, so jumping into the demos themselves, here's a quick look at, I've got 7 examples that I'm going to go through, kind of build upon the prior examples. Each one builds upon the previous one. We'll start very simple, just a single date control. We want to initialize the date control, add some user details. Again, super common thing. People don't want to have to enter first name and last name, and just pull it from the login information, do some concatenation, some calculations, show hide, and then put it all together in a workflow so that all of this functionality is there in the workflow, but we're also dynamically routing it depending on conditions in the form. Okay. A couple of quick things about the visual rule builder, and we can get back to this slide. We can jump right into doing a demo. There are a number of built-in functions in here. So this should be kind of familiar to anybody who's used Excel or Google Sheets, for example. So these are the functions that you can use to perform calculations or for example, to retrieve today's date, or to add things, concatenate things, retrieve information, and so on and so forth. A wide, a pretty complete set of functions is available. And then also a number of operators so that you can also create expressions. You can add, subtract, multiply, divide, concatenate, and a variety of common operations that you might want to do when you're writing a business rule to perform some calculation or do any of these things. Okay, so now that being said, let's jump to the actual demo. Is this, Megan, is the screen still showing my Firefox?
Yes, I see your frevvo with the VRB. Yep.
Sorry, it changed. This is, I'm using a different browser. I've logged into my account on our cloud-based system over here. And we're going to go through some examples of that I mentioned earlier. So the first example here is very simple. We're literally going to initialize today's date. So let's take a look at how that, it's a common thing. People do it all the time, purchase orders, whatever, expense reports, whatever the heck you want. It's going to have a date very commonly. So I've got a control on the form here called today's date. For those who aren't familiar with it, you know, when you want to create a date on your form, you take the date and you drag and drop it over here. You can change it, change its name. We can call it today. This particular control happens to be called today date. Let's just delete this one since it's not relevant. And all we want to do in this first instance here, first example, is initialize that control with today's date. So the first thing here is, if you look at the toolbar at the top here, we've got a settings icon here, and then a rules pane. When you click on that, it takes you to the rules pane. I've got a rule already created, which sets the date to today. So let me delete that rule and we'll recreate it. So to create a new rule, you just click plus. It's going to create a new rule. Let's give it a name. Set today's date. And then you'll see over here, there's rule builder and rule code. There are two separate ways that you can create rules. This webinar is definitely going to focus on the rule builder, which lets you really do most of the things that you need to do. But there are certain situations, particularly complex, with very custom logic that may be possible only, for example, integrating with an external third party or custom programmed web service. You may want to do that, and that the rule code allows you to write JavaScript if you know what you're doing, to be able to do really anything that you want to create, literally any custom behavior that you want. Well, back to the rule builder. In this case, all we're trying to do is set today's date. Let's click on Run Builder, and you see a panel come up here. So the rule builder panel generally has three screens on it. The first one is the condition. When do you want this rule to run? The second panel is what do you want to do when the condition is true? And the third panel is what do you want to do when the condition is false? And every rule basically falls into that category. When do I want to run it? What do I want to do when the condition is true? What do I want to do when the condition is false? Now, in this case, we don't have a condition. This is an initialization rule. We always want to set today's date automatically. So you just check that box, initialization rule only, and click next. And what we want to do, we want to set today's date. So you click in here. You can start typing, and it'll narrow it down to the appropriate control. But in this case, we're going to get today's date. What do we want to do? We want to set it to, there are a number of options in here. So we're going to set it to. And what are we going to set it to? We're going to use one of those functions that I had shown you the list of earlier. In this case, there's a function called today. And again, you'll see as you start typing, autocomplete down below shows you what's available, in this case, today. So we're going to set the date, the control called today date to today's date using the function called today. Click finish, and that's about it. We've got the rule already set up. Didn't have to write any JavaScript, although if you want, you can always click on the rule code and see the JavaScript code, the underlying code that has been generated. Typically, you don't need to worry about this. And of course, in this case, it's pretty simple. When the form loads, set the date using this function. We can test this out. Just click the test button here. And you see that the form loads up, and you can see that the date is indeed initialized to today's date. So the rule worked as we had programmed it, or as we had set it up. One thing I do want to point out down here is this debug console, this gray, dark gray area. It only appears in this test mode, so it's not going to appear when you deploy the form to production and have users, real world users filling it out. But when you're testing it, it's useful to see what's going on. This debug console down below actually shows you which rules ran. So it's showing you that the rule called set today's date executed when the form was loaded. It's triggered by form.load. Here's the actual rule, and the details here tell you what actually happened, and it set the value of the today date to this particular string, which happens to be today's date. So this is a useful, the debug console is very useful down below because you can actually see what's going on. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, real world forms tend to be long and complex, and there are probably going to be lots of rules that get triggered at a variety of depending on a variety of times, depending on a variety of conditions. And so the debug console really helps you see what is actually going on in your form. Okay, so real quick recap here as we went to the rules panel, we created a new rule, gave it a name, and ran the rule builder. And all we did in this case was an initialization rule that set the value of a control. Okay, so now having done that, let's move on to the next slightly more complex, but really very similar example. And in this case, what we're doing is, in addition to today's date, we've also got a few other controls on the form. We've got a first name, a last name, an email address, and a manager. And what we want to do is, instead of when I fill out this form as a user, instead of having me type up my first name, last name, email address, etc., since I'm logged in, let's retrieve that information from the system and automatically populate these controls. So again, go to that rules tab. You see that today's date rule is already there. It's very much the same as the previously created one. But now we've got a second rule here called set user details. So when I set these user details, there's some problem here on my screen. Okay, well, let's not worry about it. The rule builder, again, is we've got a number of things that are going on here. We can click on any of these things to actually edit the rule. But what you can see over here is we're setting the first name, last name, email address, and manager. Again, very similar to the today function that we used for setting the date to values that are obtained using the user, using functions, user's first name, user last name, user email. These are built-in functions in the rule builder, and you can use them anywhere in your rule. So, I can delete a couple of these, and let's recreate those. Again, in this case, it's an initialization rule, so there's no condition. We always want to initialize these things. You see that there are already a couple of actions. So in the previous rule, we only had one thing that we're doing, but you can do any number of things. So let's add a couple of actions here. In the first one, we're taking the first name, and the second one is going to be the last name. We're going to, in both cases, set a value in this rule. And in this case, we're going to set it to user first name. So again, when you start typing, you'll see how the autocomplete narrows down the list of available choices. So in this case, it's a user first name. And in this case, I'm going to use user last name. And that's it. And again, if you type next, you'll see here that there is no way that you can add a false condition. Obviously, since we didn't specify a condition in the first place, it couldn't possibly be false. So we want this rule to always run, and we want it to initialize with the email address, manager ID, first name, and last name. So when I click this test button here, we'll see now that, once again, we should see that the date was initialized using our first rule, and then the first name, last name, email, and manager ID were initialized using the second rule. If we go down here to the debug console, we can indeed see that two separate rules ran. The first rule start was today's date, which was the previous one that initialized the date. And then set user details was the name of the second business rule, and that ran. Also triggered by form.load. Here's the rule itself, and here are the values that it set: last name, first name, manager, email, etc. So really, really similar to the previous example, except in this case, we're taking multiple actions. And in fact, this form also has multiple rules. Okay. So now that we've looked at examples of setting up initializing controls, the next example I wanted to go through is how do you sort of do something with values that have been entered in the form. So again, we're going to start with a really simple example of just concatenates a pair of strings. This is actually common, believe it or not, in particular, for example, new hire onboarding. So new hire onboarding often will generate a federal W-4 form. And if you look at a federal W-4, it doesn't have a separate first name and last name, it just has a name field. In which case you want to concatenate your first name, probably the middle initial and the last name, and enter that into that federal W-4. So why make the user type it? We want something nice and user-friendly, so the user types the first name or last name, or in this case, doesn't even type it, it just is automatically entered. We want to concatenate these two into a field called full name. So we've created a field in here called full name. Its name, unsurprisingly, is full name. And we're going to create a rule that simply concatenates those two. So here's the rule. Let's delete that and recreate it. So we've now got these two rules, setting the date and the user details. As before, click plus to add a new rule. We'll call it set up the full name. I'm going to click run builder. Now in this case, again, there isn't really a condition. I mean, we could add a condition that we only want this rule when the first name or the last name are filled. But we don't really need to because it's just going to be blank if they aren't filled in there. So we'll leave the condition field blank. We'll click next over here. And what do we want to do now? We want to concatenate the first name and last name, and we want to set the value of full name. So let's see, we want to set full name to, and what do we want to set it to? Well, it's going to be an expression, a concatenation. So if you, if we go back and look at the list of functions here, you'll see that concatenation is done using the plus operator, first name plus last name. So let's try that out. Which two fields do we want to concatenate? Well, we want to concatenate fields called first name and last name. So again, start typing. You'll see there are two choices, that user first name function that we used earlier, and the first name field on the form. So in this case, we want to use the field. So first name plus last name, that's the field. And that's simply going to concatenate that first and last name. In most typical cases, you want to put a space between those two. So let's just put a space in quotes and another plus. And what this is going to do now is going to set up the first name, a space, and the last name, and automatically assign that into full name. Click finish over here. Again, pretty straightforward rule code that's been generated. And we'll see examples later on where the rule code can get much more complicated. But a simple example where this time, instead of initializing fields, we're actually taking the values of controls from the form and using them in a business rule to affect another control. So let's try it out again. And you'll see over here that indeed the three rules ran in this particular case. We set the date, we set the user details, and then we set the full name automatically as well. So the first name and the last name were indeed concatenated with a space. If I were to change this to Smith, you'll see again that the full name field was automatically updated. So it's doing exactly what we wanted to do, which is concatenate a pair of strings, initializing the value of the full name control with that information. Okay, so far so good, pretty straightforward stuff. We've initialized fields, we've concatenated strings. The next thing we're going to move on to is something slightly more complicated, a little bit different. In this case, now we're going to perform a calculation. Again, a really common use case. You can think of lots of forms, purchase orders, expense reports, travel claims. They often have a table, a unit price, a quantity, things that need to be added up or multiplied to compute something. I'm sure you're very familiar with these things. Now, down here, again, in addition to all of the fields above and all the rules I have in here, I've added another control. This is a table, a grid. It's down here in the form. Added a table. A table has a description. It's a list of items, really, an items table. Each item, has a description, a quantity, and a unit price, and then a subtotal. You'll notice that the subtotal field here is grayed out because we don't want the user typing anything in that subtotal field. That's something that's going to be computed automatically by our business rule. The other thing you'll notice here is that the table has multiple rows. So obviously there can be multiple subtotals, and you want each one to correspond to the row that it's in. So how do we do this? Again, using the using the visual rule builder, I'm going to delete this rule and I'm going to recreate it for you. So I'm going to click plus over here and we'll say let's calculate the subtotals in this case. And we're going to run the rule builder here. Now, in this case, we do have a condition. So when do we want to compute a subtotal? We want to compute a subtotal when we have a unit price and a quantity, because otherwise we can't compute it. So we're going to add a pair of conditions here. To add those conditions, just click this add condition. See, a couple of conditions got added. What are the conditions? Unit price. So when the unit price is filled, right? So I've got something entered in the unit price. Let's go to quantity, the same thing, when the quantity is filled. Again, we don't really have to worry about the repeating nature of unit price or quantity. The fact that there may be multiple unit prices and multiple quantities and therefore multiple subtotals, the rule builder will automatically take care of that. So in this case, we want to do this when the unit price and quantity are filled, and that's represented down here by the logic expression 1 and 2. And you can click edit here and change that. So if you want to do it, you can do something like 1 or 2, or even create a much more complex logic expression that meets exactly the conditions that we want. In this case, we do want the default. We want to run this rule when both unit price and quantity are filled. So we're going to leave this condition as it is. Click next. What do we want to do? We want to set the subtotal. We know that. And what do we want to set it to? We want to set it to the product of the unit price and the quantity. So once again, if we go to those operators, you see that multiplication is represented by a star. Pretty common. And what we're going to do here is enter unit price multiplied by quantity. So when the unit price and quantity are filled, we want to set the subtotal to the product of those two. We click next here. Now in this case, we do have something we want to do when the action is false. We want to clear out the subtotal. So we're going to click add condition here, add action, I'm sorry, and select subtotal. And in this case, we're going to set the subtotal to empty. So what did we do in the rule? We set up a condition that says when I've got a unit price and a quantity for any particular row, I want the subtotal to be the product of those two. Otherwise, I want the subtotal to be empty. Pretty straightforward, relatively simple to understand and logical. Let's give it a shot. You'll see now that as we click, when we click the test button here, the first 3 rules ran as usual. You'll see all that stuff down below here. I'm going to clear this debug console so we can see the next rule running. So now if we type red widgets in description, let's select quantity 11. Again, the rule ran because I had something in here, but there's no value to set because the unit price has not been set up. But once I give it a unit price, you'll see now that the subtotal got set. You'll see that the system is actually computing subtotals for each row and only setting the one that's filled in. I have blue widgets. You'll see again how the subtotal is getting computed. If I were to remove this from here, you see that the subtotal disappears from that row only. And that's because of the else condition, the false condition. The quantity is filled, but unit price is not, so we want to clear the subtotal out. And if I put it back in, you'll see that the subtotal comes back. So really easy to create relatively complex behavior like this. At the end of the day, we're running a for loop, looping through the rows in a table, an indeterminate number of rows, and making sure that we set the subtotal to the product of the quantity and unit price without really having to worry about writing any of that code. If we were to actually take a look at that, this is an example now where even rule code is starting to get a little more complicated. There's a loop, we're checking whether the price and the value are set up, and then computing the value, otherwise setting the value to null. We also want to kind of run this rule when people click the plus or the minus button on the table, so that you're refreshing subtotals. In particular, when we look at the next rule where you calculate grand total, you'll see how that becomes important. Okay, so this is again a pretty simple example. All we did here is added a table and calculated a subtotal for each individual row in the table. The next example is kind of an obvious one. In most of these forms, you're going to also need to compute a grand total. And the grand total is simply the sum of the subtotals. This is a super easy rule. And to calculate the grand total, you literally have to set the grand. Well, let me just do it. I'm going to delete this rule. I'm going to click plus over here. And if we run the builder again, there's no condition over here. We always want the grand total to be the sum of the subtotals. I'm going to select a field here, call it grand total. And what am I going to do? I'm going to set it to, and again, now we're going to use a different function. We use a function called sum. Now this function is a little bit different from all the other functions that we've chosen so far, in the sense that it takes a parameter. So you have to sum something. So as you start typing, once again, you'll see that the eligible values from the form, fields that match, will show up down below. Set it up as the sum of the subtotals. Click next. There's no false false action that you can add. That's simply because there's no condition, so obviously it can't be false. And what we're doing is setting the grand total to the sum of the subtotals. Click finish here, and if we were to run this rule again, run this form, excuse me, test out this form, we'll see how the grand total down below is set to 0, but it will start updating as soon as we fill out the form. We'll see how it's being computed. Now, this is a situation where you want to make sure that that rule also runs when you remove a row from the table, because the grand total is indeed affected. So if I remove this red widgets line, you see that the grand total will update automatically to reflect the correct subtotal, the sum of the subtotal. And if I were to add something down here again, oops, sorry, well, I made a typo. Oh, instead of 1, you can see how frevvo is going to make sure that you don't, it's going to give you an error immediately. So you can see again how that grand total was updated. So another example of a rule that looks really, really simple on the surface here. I really didn't do anything. I literally did one little thing down here. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of action going on. It's taking care of all kinds of details for you. So when a table row is removed, it's going to recompute that grand total. It's going to loop through. It's just going to do the right thing automatically without you as the form designer having to really think about it or worry about it too much. Okay, so those were some examples of initializing controls. We've concatenated some strings using values of other controls from the form. We've computed subtotals and a grand total, again, using data that's been entered in the form. Really, so far, what we've been doing is setting the values of controls. Another really common example of dynamic behavior is where you don't really want to compute anything, or you don't necessarily want to change the value of a control, but you want to change when it's shown. Really common examples. There are many, many, many cases. Again, getting back to that employee onboarding. If you look at a federal I-9 form, for example, there'll be, if you check box number 4 in here, you must fill out the section below, otherwise leave it blank. Well, with frevvo, when that box is checked, the section appears, otherwise it doesn't appear, so there's no confusion. So here's an example. Let's take a look at how easy that is to do. So again, we've got the same form up above. This time now we've added something down below for payment. So we've got 2 payment methods, a check or a credit card. And we've got a section and a message down below. If the payment method is a check, we're going to display this, make the check payable to frevvo, blah, 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 so address. But if the payment method is credit card, then this check message will be hidden and the credit card section down below will show up. So if you look at the credit card section, when I click on it, you look at its properties, you'll see that this visible box here is unchecked. So by default, this credit card section will initially be invisible. And you'll see also that the payment method check has been clicked. So what we're expecting is by default, when the form starts up, check will be chosen automatically, and this message will be visible. But if the user switches it to a credit card, we want to hide this and show this section. Okay, now the other thing is within this section, the credit card holder name is required, as is the credit card holder email. So, but the section itself is not required. So if I choose a credit card, what I want to do is if I select credit card, I want to make that section visible, but I want to make sure that the user actually fills in these two fields as well. Otherwise, it's not, I don't have all the data that I need. Again, pretty simple to do with the rule builder. So here's the rule. Let's see, I don't want to mess this up. Visible. Okay, I'm going to create a new rule, and so I don't forget anything. Okay, I'm going to run the builder. The condition in this case is when the payment method is, and what is it? I'm literally going to enter the literal value here. Instead of a function, it's just the string. And that's the value of whatever you set up in that checkbox. We set it to, in that radio button, sorry. In this case, we set it to check. So we're saying when the payment method is checked, what do we want to do? Well, we want the check message to be visible. And then let's add a few actions. I think we got 5 of them. We want the credit card section to be hidden. We also want the credit card section to be optional. We also, and the other thing we want to do is, if let's say the user has gone to the credit card section, filled something out, and then said, "Nah, I want to pay by check," and I want to make sure they clear those the name and email fields. So we're going to clear out those fields and set them to empty. So we've got a completely logical set of things. If I choose the payment method check, the credit card section will be hidden and optional and cleared out, and only the check message will be visible. But if I choose the other option of credit card, what do I want to do here? I guess I want the check message to be hidden. I want the credit card section to be visible. And what else do I want? I think I want the credit card section to be required, so that that information in the credit card section will be automatically populated. I click finish. Let's just make sure I got it right. Visibility. Yeah. Let's delete the old rule and keep the new one that we just created here. And we'll see that simply by doing all of these things, the system will behave, or the form will behave as expected. Again, you can always go to the rule code over here. This one's pretty simple. It's just setting things to true or false, setting various properties of these controls to true or false. Okay. Let's run this, and if I have not made any mistake, it should work as designed. So red subtotal, grand total, you see that the payment method is check and the check message is visible. I switch it to credit card, you see the credit card section becomes visible, and that it's required. These controls have turned yellow. If I type my name in here and my email address, I can submit the form now, but I say I changed my mind. I go back to check. You'll see again that the rule ran, it showed the check message, and you see that if I went back there, it had cleared out that credit card holder and credit card email name. So this is just a simple example. All we're showing and hiding is a simple section or a message, but of course it applies to anything. You can show or hide a section containing dozens and dozens of very large sections, entire tabs. You can certainly show, hide, enable, disable, or make controls required or optional depending on conditions in the form using exactly the same mechanisms. Okay, so again, a super common use case. very, very, very commonly used in all kinds of applications that on customer forms and workflows. You want to be able to show and hide things dynamically so that the form is just easier to complete and easier to fill out, avoids mistakes, and just easy to do for the designer as well without the need to write any code. So now that we've looked at several of these examples in a form, let's put it all together into a workflow where I really want to do all of these things, but I also want to, not only do I want to compute and show hide things in the form as the user types in the form, but I also want to show or hide or affect the way the form looks depending on where in the workflow I am. So here's a workflow. It's the same form again, but we've got 3 steps in here. One's the requester, employee, whatever you want to call it. The form then routes to a manager for approval. And then under certain conditions, it will route to a VP for approval. So let's take a look at the condition first. So the condition, it's called a precondition in frevvo. In this case is if the grand total is more than $5,000. And again, you can use the same visual rule builder to set up these preconditions. You'll see in this case, preconditions are simply conditions. Obviously, there's no concept of an action. There's nothing to do because the action is simply to run the next step in the workflow or skip it. So the condition here is when the grand total, and again, it works exactly as before. You're selecting something from there, and you can say it's more than, less than, empty, equal, etc. Now, you notice that the choices in this box here change depending on what was selected here. So the grand total happens to be a number, a quantity, essentially. So the options in here change to have equal to, less than, etc., etc. So in this case, we want this VP, we want the workflow to route to the VP, but only when the grand total is more than $5,000. Of course, as before, you can add any number of conditions and set a logic operation down below. So I can say, I want this to run when the grand total is more than 5,000 and the first name is filled. I mean, that's a redundant condition, of course, because the first name is automatically filled in this case. But you can create any complex logic expression down below. Let me hit cancel so I don't mess that up. You can give the precondition a user-friendly description. So something like this. And when I click submit here, you'll see how that appears down here. So it's very easy to see that this VP step will only run if the grand total is greater than 5,000. Otherwise, it's going to be skipped. Okay. So that's a simple example of dynamically routing within the workflow itself. But the other thing that you want to do in workflows also is you want to change the appearance of the form. What does it look like? It looks different depending on which step in the workflow you're in. That's, again, really simple to do. In this case, we had a step called manager and a step called VP. You'll see that the form we've just reorganized the form a little bit. So the requester, we put the date, first name, etc., all this stuff into a section called requester. The manager field is still there, but it's hidden. The user doesn't need to see that. He or she's never going to change it. The order items, an order items section has been created, and the table, grand total, etc., has been put into that section. You'll see a couple of things in here. There are these little, first name, last name, grand total placed in curly braces. You'll see how those dynamically reflect what's actually been typed into the first name and last name, and why that's useful later on. We've also added a couple of sections here, a manager approval and a VP approval. The other thing we've done here is, if we look at this order item section here, we've added a signature over here, sign this section. Okay, so this is a digital signature. You do that by clicking on security and clicking on text/signature image. The same thing applies to manager and VP approval. They're all digitally signed in here. And what we want to do, though, is we don't need the manager approval or the VP approval sections to show up when in the first step of the workflow when the employee is filling it out. We want the manager approval section to show up in the second step when it's sitting in front of the manager. And if it routes to the VP conditionally, as you may recall, if it routes to the VP, we want the VP approval step to show up as well. In this case, we're saying we when you're at the VP step, you also want to see the manager section. It's common again to every step in the workflow can see what happened in previous steps. So how do you do that? Let's go to the rule builder again. In this case, we've actually added 5 separate rules. What do we want to do on each one of those steps? Requester, manager, and VP. And then what do we want to do on or after the VP or the manager steps? So let's take a quick look. They're all pretty simple. So on the requester step, what we want to do is we want, when do we want this to run? Well, when the current step is requester. Pretty straightforward. It's very easy to do. You see, by the way, when I deleted that rule, you saw how it's the rule builder is validating and saying, well, wait a minute, this rule is not valid because you happen to have something in the false. What to do when it's false, but there is no condition. So you must add a condition. So I'm going to add a condition here. You'll see current step is, and you can select one down there. It's going to show it to you. Requester in this case. So when the current step is requester, I want the 2 sections above, the requester and the order item section, to be set to expanded. Otherwise, I want them to be collapsed. And that's just going to make it easier for the manager in the subsequent step to, instead of looking at a large form, the sections at the top are collapsed, and the manager can simply focus on what he or she is trying to do, which is approve them. And you'll see this running. So that's the requester step. What do I want to do on the manager step? Again, pretty straightforward. When the current step is manager, I want the manager approval section to be expanded, but I also want it to be required. Otherwise, I want the manager approval section to be collapsed and optional. So I don't affect, making sure by setting it to be optional, I make sure that the frevvo doesn't, the validation does not prevent the previous user requester from submitting the form. So pretty straightforward again. The VP step is going to look really similar. It's basically exactly the same. When the step is VP, we want to set VP approval to expand it and required, otherwise collapsed and optional. And then finally, on the on or after manager step, this is, remember, what we wanted to do is say, well, we want the manager to be visible on his step and everything past that, but hidden otherwise. So what we're saying is the current step is on or after manager. The manager approval is visible, otherwise it's hidden. And really the same thing on the VP step. It's only visible during his or her step, but not prior to, and everything beyond. So it might appear that we've created a number of rules here, but this is a really simple, really common pattern. And actually, just as an FYI, we're in the middle of designing an upgrade to frevvo where all of these rules for this specific pattern, which we see over and over again, will just automatically be generated for you just by letting you answer a few questions. So look out for that. Obviously, we'll have a webinar on that when the time comes. But as of now, it's pretty easy to do. Again, we created some rules, one for each step and one for this on or after condition. Let's give it a shot, see what happens when we try it out. Seen here again, here's this form. I'm going to enter a description. Grand total, again, that same credit card check. I'm going to sign this thing. When I sign it, you'll see how the entire section got grayed out and the first name, last name, and the signature got placed there. What this basically means is that the section is now digitally signed. No one can change the values of any of the fields in the section over there. And in fact, a real PKI encrypted digital signature has been generated behind the scenes that ensures that this data in this section cannot be tampered with. In this case, notice that the grand total is less than $5,000, so we're going to skip the VP. We click send to manager. Now, for demo purposes here, I didn't actually route to the manager. I don't want to have to log in and log out somewhere else. The manager approval, you'll see how the requester and order item steps sections are collapsed, just making it easier for the manager to do his or her job. Looks good to me. Sign this section. If I wanted to look at any of these things, I could simply expand it and take a look at any time. But it looks good, so I'm going to approve the request. You'll see that an email was sent. Remember again that the condition was that the grand total has to be more than $5,000 to route to the VP. So let's just try this thing once and use some larger values. You'll see that now the grand total is $16,900, which is more than 5,000. So unless I made a mistake, it should now route to the VP. Sign this as the manager. I'm going to click approve. Now you see how the VP approval section showed up. So it only routed to the VP because it was greater than 5,000. You see the prior sections are all collapsed. I can expand and look at them, including the manager section. Whatever, I'm going to put some comments in here. I'm going to sign this section. Oh, this is a different type of digital signature. So as you can see here, there are even that digital signature can have the automatically generated string below, or you can have a box like this where the user can sign using their touch screen, finger on the touch screen, or a mouse. And I click finish, and again the same thing happened. The workflow completed. So this is an example of putting everything together. We initialize the date and the user information. We concatenate it to set up a full name. We computed subtotals and grand totals. We had a number of show hide things happening in the form just based on what the user was doing in the form. And we also had dynamic behavior showing and hiding things in the form depending on which step in the workflow we were in. So I really only have managed to scratch the surface in terms of what kinds of dynamic behavior you can have with frevvo. There are several other examples. If you attended the webinar last 2 weeks ago, remember the SQL database integration allows you to really create very complex dynamic forms, master detail, being able to create dynamic drop-downs and pick lists from SQL or even from Google Sheets. A number of these examples are on our website. You can go to our website, actually. Let me go there. There are tutorials in our documentation. There are video demos on our website under videos. And then there are also a number of examples that you can look at. And of course, if you'd like to learn more, we would love to talk to you. Click on schedule a demo, and you'll be able to schedule a demo, a meeting with someone from our team right away. Okay, so I guess I'm going to stop there. Looks like I've gone a few minutes over, but maybe we have time for a couple of questions here. Megan, are there any questions that I can answer?
Let's see, and attendees, go ahead and post your questions there in the GoToWebinar panel if you would like. Ashish, we do have one question. Can you edit that rule code that was generated by the rule builder?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Certainly, you can totally do that. You just click, let me go and show you. If you click on rule code, you can just click this edit code button, and it'll warn you. But once you edit the code, you can't go back to the rule builder, because of course the rule builder might not understand exactly what you've done in there. But when I click OK, now you can just type and do whatever you want in the code. So yeah, you can edit that code, no problem at all. But once you've edited it, you can't go back to the visual aspect of it. Okay. Make sense?
Yeah, super. What does it mean if a rule shows up with the red background or the pink background?
Oh, sure. And when a rule shows up with a pink background, it means that essentially it means that there's an error in it. And that's a good example. So let's take an example and show you a situation where that happens. So here's a rule. We've created something called user details, which said email, manager, first name, last name, using these things. So if I went in and said the last name, I just delete this control. Well, now that rule is invalid. It's because it's setting the last name to some value, but there is nothing in here called last name. If I went in there, you'll see that the rule is now pink. And it's trying to tell you, wait, there's a problem in here. I don't know if it tells you in here, but in the rule builder, certainly it will tell you that the last name, it's highlighting exactly what's wrong in this rule. Now, if you were using code, the JavaScript code, if instead of the rule builder for a particular rule, it would still highlight it pink, and down below your code, it would show you line number 7, last name is undefined, something like that, to indicate that there is an error in the form, in the rule. So essentially, frevvo won't let you create a business rule that's invalid. That's not going to work because these things. Sometimes you have forms, as I mentioned, real world business forms are long. Sometimes they have dozens and dozens of rules, and it can get pretty tricky if we allow rules with error. So you need to be sure that the rules that you create, both with the rule builder and the rule code, are valid. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
All right, super. And we do have another question from the audience. He says it may be outside of this subject, but where the subtotals are dynamically calculated, could you do that as well for counting check boxes, like checked check boxes? So to increment the count if checked and decrement if it's unchecked.
Yeah, I know you can certainly do it with JavaScript for sure. How would you do it with the rule builder? Yeah, I think you could do it. Something along the lines of, let me go back to grand total. I'm probably going to get this wrong on the fly, but I think you could do it probably using something like setting the grand total to just grand total plus one. I'm not sure what the condition would be. I know you can certainly do it using JavaScript, but I'm not 100% can't off the top of my head figure out how to do it in the rule builder for specifically. I think the specific question was if I've got a checkbox with 10 choices, the rule needs to count how many of those were checked. Is that right?
Right. I think that's what he's asking.
Right. Not sure if you can do that visually. I haven't quite come across that one as yet. Not sure if you can think of how to do that visually, Megan, but I know you can. I'm 100% sure you can do it in JavaScript.
Okay, super. I think that's all we've got, Ashish.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your attending and hope that you found the webinar useful. You can certainly contact us at any time with questions, our website, phone number, or email address. And finally, the recording of this webinar will be available. Has been recorded, so the recording will be made available both on our website. You should also automatically get an email once the recording is posted. Great. Take care. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your attendance. Bye-bye.